Okay, we're going to get started. I want to invite folks to feel free to bring a chair a little closer if you'd like, or stay where you are. Hi, everyone. Good evening. Okay. I have been looking forward to this night for a year. I was introduced to Elise by Anna Winger, a mutual friend of ours, and we sat down for a little coffee at Green Table, and I just did not want to leave. I just find this woman to be endlessly fascinating and so incredibly brilliant and knowledgeable about so many of the things that I care about and that I think about. And it was such a joy to get to know you that way, and then to get to know you through the book, and now to be able to introduce our community to you. So I'm absolutely thrilled to introduce everybody tonight to Elise Loehnen. I will share with you just a bit of her bio. She's a writer, editor, and podcast host who lives in LA with her husband Rob and their two sons, Max and Sam. She is the host of Pulling the Thread, a podcast that focuses on pulling apart the stories we tell about who we are and then putting the threads back together. Ultimately, Elise is a seeker and a synthesizer, braiding together wisdom traditions, cultural history, and a deep knowledge of healing modalities to unlock new ways to contextualize who we are and why we're here. She is the author of 12 books before this one. This is her 13th and the first that has her name on the cover, because she was a ghostwriter for all of the previous books. And I hope that you feel proud of every single word that one finds in these pages. This book was an instant New York Times bestseller. It's called On Our Best Behavior, The 7 Deadly Sins, and the Price That Women Pay to Be Good. Elise, thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Thank you. Well, it's a mutual fan club, and Rabbi Sharon is on my podcast. Was that your first?
That was my first. It was my first.
We spoke in August, so it was a different time, but it was a kind of a prophetic conversation in some ways on your part.
My first radio interview ever was with this person named Krista Tippett, who I didn't know anything about.
No big deal.
Like, oh, Pa Sam said that the future's in radio. I guess I'll take the interview. And then I realized who Krista Tippett was. And that was my first radio, and this was my first podcast with Elise Loehnen. So I don't have an on-ramp here. It's like just get thrown right into the best. Elise, the book is incredible. It's really a deep dive into each of the 7 deadly sins. But that's really just a frame for us to understand how we are trained to live, and why some of that training is so toxic for our bodies, for our sense of self, and for our society. And I'm so curious if you can tell us a little bit about why it was so important for you to put this book into the world in this moment, and really what's the thesis of the book that you want to put forward?
Well, I'd say that the most fundamental thesis is that women are programmed for goodness. And when I say goodness, I'm not talking about the quality of goodness that we would think of as sort of absolute, or the goodness that is inherently baked into each of us. I'm talking about a culturally mediated idea of what it is to be a good woman. And the book isn't really about men, but in some ways it is as well, that men are programmed for power, which is as harmful to them and to our culture as what happens to women. And I really wanted to interrogate why, as a performance-addicted child who grew up, my father's Jewish, I grew up in Montana, my father's Jewish, actually met Anna Winger because he's a South African Jew, and he moved to Montana, he's a doctor, and he moved to Montana because he wanted to have horses, and she was convinced that he was part of the anti-apartheid movement, and this was his cover story. So she's working on a project. That's how I met Anna, how I eventually met you. But that, I grew up in this progressive family not anti-patriarchal, but certainly not patriarchal in a traditional way. And yet this like need to be good was so baked into who I am. And it came out in, highly performative ways. And it wasn't until I was in my mid-40s that I realized what was driving me was a cultural idea that I would never achieve, and that I was this breathless shell of a person trying to be good. And it's so insidious. I never signed up for this. I didn't subscribe to this. I didn't choose this. I didn't grow up learning from a priest that I was bad, and yet culture is contagious, as we know, and we whispered into each other's ears. And it was as alive in me as it is in, I think, almost every other woman. And so that was the genesis. And then the sins sort of arrived at my doorstep, and I'm going to tell you what they are, because they're not in the New Testament, and they're not actually in the Old Testament as a set either. They came out of the Egyptian desert in the 4th century, and it wasn't until 590 that Pope Gregory said that they were the cardinal vices, and he assigned them all to Mary Magdalene. This is the homily when he said that she was the carrier of the 7 deadly sins. He conflated her with the woman who anoints Jesus' feet, different women, and then he turns them both into one woman who is a penitent prostitute. And that's the reputation that she wore until, I think, 1980? It wasn't, something stunning like that. But they are sloth, pride, envy, greed, gluttony, lust, and anger. And originally they were 8th, and the 8th was sadness, and that was dropped from the list. And I wrote about it in the book, particularly as it relates to men and the way that we sever them from their feelings and turn boys into men.
And each of the chapters, you take one of these 7 deadly sins and you say, like, for example, envy, believing envy to be sinful, we deny our own wanting. So because we've so internalized these sins, these kind of made up by Pope Gregory sins, imagine that sermon, like the most impactful sermon in the history of humanity. And we internalize these ideas, and then we self-limit in a way, or society limits us from fully expressing who we are, and from living fully, from loving fully. And you essentially are inviting us to reclaim who we are at our essence, and not to be limited by this, 6th century, was he 6th century misogynistic, writer, I think a little bit sloppy writer, if I may. So believing ourselves to be sinful, we deny our own talents. Believing gluttony to be sinful, we deny our own hunger. Every single chapter spoke to me here, but I want to ask. Let me just ask you first: is there a particular chapter that really speaks to the heart for you? I mean, I know that all 7 of them obviously are very personal and resonant for you, but is there one in particular that you felt like this is really the heart of my struggle, and working through the chapter helped you work through those dynamics and reclaim a part of yourself?
So it was all therapy. And originally I wanted to write this book as a clinician. I'm not a clinician, of course, but that I wanted to sort of diagnose society and then write about it, and do all the research, which I did. And then my editor was like, you have to put yourself in this book and drag everyone through it with you. And it was so hard, because as much as I wanted to sort of believe that this was a mental job, I recognize the script, I'm over it, I'm still dealing with my relationship to my body, my relationship to food. I mean, so a good woman is a woman who needs no rest, doesn't want anything for herself, doesn't need any attention, affirmation, or praise, is never hungry, has no appetite or desire, is never upset about any of it. Like, does this not sound familiar? And this is so deep in me that getting it out and interrogating it is still a full-time job. But yes, I would say the chapter for me that really started this was envy. And it's the chapter that every conversation, particularly when I'm talking only to women, that every conversation comes back to, and it started many, many years ago, I was interviewing Lori Gottlieb, who
A
wrote...
member of IKAR, by the way, Dr.
Amazing.
Lori Gottlieb.
And she just had surgery, I saw. Love her.
Amazing.
Amazing. So in Maybe You Should Talk to Someone, there's a very small aside where she says, I always tell my clients to pay attention to their envy because it tells them what they want. And that just... The book's amazing. We had a long conversation about all parts of the book, but I had to keep coming back to that small sentence because to me, it sparked something huge, which was what you had mentioned, this feeling of like envy. I don't have any envy. Like, ew, gross, ugh, no, not me. I would never envy anyone. So that immediately told me that I am clearly full of it, full of envy. And that I didn't know what I wanted. And I couldn't clearly articulate that. And I don't know, I mean, I'm a mother and a wife, and I have always worked, and I'm very good at subjugating anything that I might want to other people's needs and making that sort of the de facto way that I prioritize my life. But I wouldn't have been able to tell you what I wanted. And so that was a big shock for me. And then I realized, and this was close to the 2016 election, and I had always been concerned that women would have trouble turning out for Clinton. And we obviously saw that came to pass. And I was like, well, it's very clear to me because there's an instinct, particularly in women of her generation, to just say, I don't like her. Mm-hmm. There's something about her. She rubs me the wrong way. Who does she think she is? To me, it always felt like, why her and not me? And that, I understand that feeling because as I worked with what Lori said, I had to recognize, like, there are women who I am just like, I didn't think her book was that good. I don't know why I did so well. And that the way to reverse engineer my envy and what I wanted was by looking around and saying, who grates my nerves? Who do I find myself irrationally responding to and saying, like, I don't like her? And if you start doing this, you start realizing that you all have like that button with someone else. You don't really share a target. But that, to me, I feel like we have a culture-wide issue with envy for women because we've never been allowed to own our own wanting. And these sins, Venn diagram with each other. Envy and pride are very related. We destroy visible women. We are so quick to put them back in their place, and which becomes a playbook for all of us. And then I have friends who are very successful in various industries, and they will, get a promotion to president of a company that we all care about. And they're like, I don't want a press release. I don't want anyone to know, because they know that people will come for them. It's so sad. And then meanwhile, it also Venn diagrams with scarcity, which is very alive for women. And some of it's real and some of it's perceived, but there is a very strong insistence in us and in our culture that there's really only room for one of us. So if she has this thing, then that means I can't have it too. And to have it, I need to dethrone her, destroy her, or push her aside. And this stuff is unconscious. It's insidious. You would never say like, oh yeah, that's true. You would disavow that very intensely. But it's true. I see it all the time. Now that I look for it, I see it all the time. But so envy is the gateway. Because I think the minute that women can let all their wanting come up, as uncomfortable as that is, it gets some air, and you start to recognize, like, I want that for you too. And that would be beautiful if you got that. And that we don't all want the same things is another shocking revelation, but it's true. So yeah, I'd say envy.
I was so moved by that chapter, and it reminded me of rabbinical school, and where when I entered rabbinical school in the mid-90s, I finished in 2001, there were 120 women rabbis, and so very, very few of us And we were not friends with each other. We did not talk to each other. And I realized in my 5th year, right before ordination, I thought, what are we doing? Like, why? And I realized that there was this there's a big bro culture in rabbinical school, or there was at the time.
Love it.
And like, it's like a bro culture and a busser culture, which means meat and men. It's like, and the men eat meat together, and I'm like a little vegetarian woman, and but I realized that I was so much more inclined toward the guys, and even I was a groomsman in one of my chavruta, my study partner's wedding. I wanted to stand on the guys' side because they were my friends and not the women. And I realized we were in this man's world, and we had all internalized that there was room for one of us. And so it better be me and not the other one. And at some point, I'm like, hey, sisters, let's go out together. And we actually had a beautiful night, and we went to the mikveh together. We did like a ritual bath. We did a ritual together, and then we sat together, and we all talked about how we all felt we were frauds. And it was a breakthrough moment for me, because I realized literally I'd spent years in that environment feeling competitive with only the couple of other women in the class, but not feeling competitive with any of the guys. And it's such a strange internalization. That process is so strange. There is also a piece of what you talk about that I'm very interested in thinking about joy, and my sense that part of our sacred obligation to each other is showing up for the joyous moments, and it's so hard to do that. And one of the unspoken reasons why it's hard is because we don't think it's fair that someone else gets the joy when we don't. Yeah. And so, I've had many people say to me, and I'm sure some people in the room can resonate to this, like, literally everyone can get pregnant, but I can't. Or she gets love and I don't get love. Or as one of my former best friends said to me, like, why do you get David, with all due respect? So I was like, thanks, best friend. So, like, I think that it makes it really hard when we don't know where those feelings are coming from, and then we feel shame that we feel those feelings, but we feel like it's not fair that someone else has what I don't have, and it makes it harder for us to be present to their joy, which is actually a very deep spiritual calling. We need to be present for each other's joy, and we need each other to be present for ours, but because of envy, there's like a block that really makes it very hard to achieve that.
Yeah. And this idea that, like, you never get to go first. And I was just interviewing Anne Lamott, and she was talking about how her mom invariably took the broken egg or the broken piece of cake or the half-eaten piece of cake. And just that watching that as a child trained her to never. And she was like, I want the cookie. Like, I watch someone eat the cookie, and I want the cookie. And I think, I don't know, that to me was so resonant of my own family, where I would never take food from my children. My husband does not have that problem. But it's this, like, we have struggled to fill ourselves. And so it makes it even harder to think of filling, I think, sometimes, like, another woman,
Can I tell you a story?
Yeah, please.
Once we were at a really amazing restaurant, and we had a beautiful dinner. And afterwards, they came over and said, would you like some dessert? And the whole family said, no, they didn't need dessert. But I really wanted dessert. So I finally was like, I shouldn't, nobody else wants it. And finally I'm like, no, you know what? I'm getting dessert. So I got an apple pie with coffee ice cream, my favorite dessert. And it was an amazing French restaurant. And they brought over the apple pie, and the other 4 people in my family all had said that they didn't want dessert. And when that pie hit the table, like wild beasts, like all of them at the thing, and they grabbed it and they ate the entire thing in like 4 seconds flat. And I just sat there like, I'm the one who ordered this, and I'm waiting for them to notice that I didn't get a bite.
Yeah.
And nobody noticed. And so the waiter came over and asked if we wanted anything else. I said, yeah, I'd like an apple pie with coffee ice cream, please. And so he brought over a second one, and the same thing happened, and then a third, and then a fourth. And literally after 4 desserts for this family, finally, I was getting so angry because literally it was like they didn't notice the dynamic, but I noticed the dynamic. And finally, I'm like, you listen to me. We are getting one more, and you're all going to sit and watch me eat this cake. And so they did. And the story they told when we got home was Ima took us out for dinner, but she got a dessert and made us all sit and watch while she ate cake. And I think if you ask Sammy right now her version of the story, it would be that. And so but now when I read after having read your book, now I think, oh my God, it's so deep in me. Like, why was I sitting there like this saying, why didn't anyone notice that I want a bite? Instead of, I should have gotten in there like a wild animal myself and grabbed a bite. And instead, we're really trained to sit back, but there's still anger that's starting to stir up inside of us because it's not fair. Yeah. And it's not right that they didn't notice and that they didn't save a bite for me. And so I think it's like the level of internalization is so profound here.
So profound and modeled for us all over our culture. And that's why, I also wanted to really try and dig at the knot of, what is it to be a woman, or what is it to be a man, right? Which I know we're all questioning intensely at this moment in time, too. And so much of what we are told about who we are is culture, but it's served to us as nature, right? As a woman, it's your nature to be nurturing, caring, and good and kind. And as a man, it's your nature to be dominant and holding a spear and hunting wild boar, Meanwhile, as we learn more and more about our history, prehistory, we're discovering that it's always been far more complex and always been far more interesting and varied. But yet, what we're fed is just a thinner and thinner story in some ways, as much as we're trying to sort of explode that book and tell a different story.
It's so interesting because your book came into the world at a moment when I feel like we had finally broken through this kind of gender binary standard that was so normative for so long, and the book is, and you're aware of that, and you write about that, and the tension of acknowledging this kind of non-binary moment, and also there are still things that women internalize. And so can you address that a little bit for our community?
Let me try. So essentially, and what I write about in the context of it's about femininity and masculinity, which are unfortunately coded, right, as gendered ideas, but that we're all effectively non-binary in the sense that we carry both of these energies, ideally in a very balanced way. And I think women are very familiar with this. I'm more comfortable in my masculine than in my feminine. And if you think of them as sort of the divine qualities of these ideas, the divine masculine would be out in the structure, order, truth, direction. The divine feminine would be nurturance, creativity, containment, care. And these, unfortunately, are then assigned to genders. We're very literal about it in a pretty sad way. And it's in some ways, it's not that gender is irrelevant. But I guess some people would say that, right? But that it's on each of us, or that to be truly who we are, we need both at different times during the day, but in many ways in equal measure. And I think women really get this, and I think some men do. My father was deeply in his feminine, which I very much appreciated. My husband is deep in his feminine, but so many men don't know how to let their feminine up. And I think about when you look at our culture and how teetering out of balance we are, it feels like we would all be so much better if the men, instead of women being pushed to be more masculine or more toxically masculine or more patriarchal, which we see a lot, for men to let their feminine come up and let women relax into both. That's my dream. Is that what you meant?
Yeah, I'm just thinking about that is a beautiful dream. I'm thinking just about I think it's what you're saying. I think that I certainly was raised in a very gender binary way. Like there was no they them when I was growing up. There was like there were really clear assumptions that about what gender each of us was. We did not discover that. It was put on us. And there were all of the assumptions about how that manifests, like what the kind of traits are that we would carry as a result. And now it's just a whole different world. I mean, it's just really like I feel like that is, one of the like wondrous aspects of this moment that we're living in, that people are able to identify themselves in a way that they're able to discover themselves. Yeah. And so I'm just kind of struck by that. And also at the same time, kind of navigating this non-binary moment and space with really strong and clear messages that are still sent to men and sent to women. Women are to be, to be good, and men are not to be sad. And, like those messaging. So I'm just curious about it, and maybe it will come up a little bit more in the Q&A when we talk about it. I would invite that from anyone, especially if there are non-binary people in the room who want to speak to that. We'd love to hear your voice. I would love for you to talk about gluttony. This is such an interesting, oh my God, every piece of this was fascinating, but you talk a lot about weight stigma and the idea that we all, there's so many assumptions that we make about our bodies, and it's leaving us profoundly unwell. Yeah. And I would love for you to speak in general about gluttony, but also about Ozempic specifically, if you wouldn't mind, because I think that it's important to have a public conversation about that. Yeah. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I actually think you're one of the first people to talk publicly about this in this way, and I'm just struck by that. It feels like a very taboo thing to be talking about publicly. So I'm curious to hear, and if you can share your thoughts. So
it's wild because when I was writing my book and sending it to production, Ozempic, so in Hollywood, they were, I'm sure many of you guys might know this, but they were called peptides. And actors have been using peptides for far longer than whenever they sort of blasted into the mainstream at the Oscars. And so I wrote about that and was like, oh my God, I'm sort of blowing the whistle on this clandestine thing happening in Hollywood, but it's setting a standard for everyone else in this country.
Can you just explain what that means? Like, what is peptide? What is Ozempic?
What is Ozempic? So it's a GLP-1 agonist, and it's Mounjaro, Ozempic. They are a class of drugs that have actually been in use for a while for people who have type 2 diabetes, and they can be life-saving and control people's blood sugar, and they have a side effect of causing weight loss. And it's usually, I think, a 10 to 15% of BMI. And people, to be fair, can present in their blood sugar under control and be in much better shape, particularly the history of cardiovascular disease. And the context for this, and I write about this in Gluttony, my dad's a physician, incredibly fat phobic, also had like a wild metabolism where he has weighed 145 to 150 pounds for his entire life. He's tiny and judges and eats. He's the person who would have had all 4 pieces of pie. So it's really ripe for him. But he's would be very judgmental and sort of snipery about people's weight as a child, which influenced me obviously greatly as well. And represents, I think, the primary medical view, which is pretty fat phobic. And you are judged by health based on this BMI standard, which is a very rudimentary tool that was developed by like a racist ethnographer to compare different groups of people. And it's faulty. Like if you have a lot of muscle, your BMI is going to appear very high, et cetera. But this is how we sort of equate morality and goodness with bodies. And if you are thin, you have a good body, and you're a good person who's not lazy or gluttonous. And if you have a bad body, then you don't care. And not only that, you're like a tax on the health system, FYI, right? This is fed to us, so we were all probably full of this stigma. And it's a really complex issue because stigma drives weight gain. Diets fail, we all know this, but they also drive weight gain. It's so complex and so sad. And also, we all have different bodies. So this idea that we should all abide by standard sizing is strange. We've always had different bodies. So we were sort of getting to this point culturally where there was this movement towards inclusivity around size and a much deeper and more nuanced conversation about the fact that there are different kinds of fat. I know many skinny fat people who are full of fat around their organs. That's very dangerous. If you have subcutaneous fat, that's not. And so we were getting close to really having a breakthrough culturally where we were seeing bodies of different sizes, and it's also the last acceptable stigma. It's not illegal except in maybe 1 or 2 states to essentially, I think there are no laws protecting people from being discriminated against based on size and appearance in most states. And people who are overweight earn less, just across the board. There's a lot of discrimination. So anyway, we were close to breaking through, and then Ozempic came. And it's another one of those, it's essentially now you can get it off-label, and you can get it from concierge doctors. I think the most Ozempic usage in the country is on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. No, it's like, I wish it were a joke, but it's not, because it's like $1,000 a month. And a lot of people are using it who are already sort of normal weight to be underweight. If you've gone out for dinner with friends who have lost their appetite and don't eat, they might be on Ozempic. And in some ways, there's this part of me that's like, well, maybe this drug, if it becomes available to everyone, is like being a bottled blonde, where if you could do it, you can do it, or you can choose not to, and maybe it will make thinness less compelling as a way to code value in society, that like you're in control of your body and you care about yourself and you exercise. But I don't know, we're really far from that. And it's a really complex conversation. Yes. Actually, Johann Hari has a book coming out in a couple months. It's fantastic, called The Magic Pill. And it's about his journey on Ozempic, and it's very well researched. But it's a cultural and a physical issue, and they're very entwined.
It strikes me as you're talking about this, and I'm sure folks have a lot of questions that are emerging as you discuss this, that shame plays such a prominent role in each of these, at the heart of each of these. Shame around the way that we eat, shame around the way that we spend, shame around the way that we feel about other people's achievements. And I'm just thinking about Father Greg Boyle from Homeboy Industries, who writes and speaks a lot about shame. And he says that shame is at the heart of every addiction, because shame is such a painful, terrible experience that we will do anything to block ourselves from experiencing shame. So some people turn to addiction, and others do other things that kind of cover over the shame that we have from, because of our pride or envy or whatever it is. And I wonder if you can just reflect a little bit on the role of shame, if you see that as a connective tissue here.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I think that, of course, there's sort of we don't want to feel bad, right? It feels terrible to feel bad. It's so hard to suffer and to feel pain, which are obviously realities of life. But I think that shame has such an extra edge to it. And I think that the qualities of these sins are also shameful for women. So you can it's kind of a synonym in a way for the way that they make us feel bad. And I think that some people turn numb or turn to addiction or virtuous activities. I write in the Sloth chapter a lot about my workaholism and how I use that as an antidote to my anxiety, right? Because I'll just be really productive, and then I don't have to think or sit or worry about what's happening in the world. And I think that what we see, and this, one of the core, I didn't really realize it, but now for anyone who likes Carl Jung's work, that the book in some way is about the collective shadow of women. And when we take what we think is bad and we repress it or suppress it, and again, not consciously, we then tend to project it. And so much of what we do as women to ourselves is we judge and police ourselves, and then we judge and police each other. And we celebrate the judging and policing of women because it feels good. It's like, it's her, it's not me, right? She's the glutton or the slut or, whatever it may be. We make her bad because we don't know how to integrate and process our own bad feelings, which are what make us whole and make us human and are an incredible part of this experience. But we're so conditioned to be scared of these feelings that we don't know how to attend to them.
I want to ask you 2 more questions, and then we'll take a couple questions from folks if you have, and then we'll wrap for the night. So one, I'm thinking so much. The 7 deadly sins are not Jewish ideas, obviously. But it makes me think about religious norms and religious practices in our tradition and how oppressive they can be and how liberating they can be. And so I've been thinking about the ways that traditional prohibitions on touch can make people feel shame when they yearn for touch and when they need touch, and can also create like an incredible sacredness to touch that is really lost in our broader culture. And I think touch is like to be shomer negia, which is to guard the touch, is just one example, but there's so many of them. Like we have all these boundaries in Jewish law that prevent us from just doing whatever we want to do, and they can be incredibly painful when they don't match our own systems. Like I was just speaking with someone the other day who asked me about when we're mourning in our time of grieving, we're not supposed to hear live music. And the idea is it's too joyful, and you can't have that kind of joy when you're in grief. And so we had tickets we bought tickets a year in advance for a Coldplay concert in San Diego with the kids, and I was so excited to go with my daughter, who's going to graduate with her friends and their kids and their parents. And then my father died, and the concert was just a month later. And I really thought my dad would not want me to miss this concert. But Jewish law really is clear. Like you're not supposed to go hear Coldplay in the Snapdragon Theater a month after your father dies. And so I was really struggling with it, and ultimately, I didn't know what to do. And so I called my friend who's a halachic decision maker. And I asked him what to do, and he told me that in his own year of grieving, that he realized that only when he heard music could he grieve. But he didn't want to break the rules publicly, so he would put on a baseball hat and go one town over and listen to live music and just weep and think of his father. And I thought it was so beautiful that he so in other words, the rules are there to both lift us up and give us guidelines and a roadmap. And someone said to me the other day, when my mother died, I had no roadmap. I needed a roadmap, and there was nothing for me. And I'm like, we have a roadmap, and it's incredible, and it's very precise, and it doesn't really fit for everyone. And then we feel guilt and we feel shame when it doesn't fit exactly right. And so my rabbi friend found a way to honor the system a little bit, but also do what he needed to do. I'm struck by.
Did you go to the concert?
I did not. I did not go to the concert. No, but it was too soon for me. Also, the truth is, I felt like it was just too close. And instead, I went to my mom, and my sister came, and we read condolence letters that night. It turned out to be exactly what I should have been doing that night. Anyway, so I want to just share with you that when I read your book, I'm taking it in both as a mother who wishes that I could redo my kids' childhood, because I think I was part of delivering some of these messages to my kids unwittingly, because I had also received these messages, and I remember getting mad at Eva once because there were 2 toys. We gave them 2 toys. She broke the first one, and then she gave the broken one to Sammy, and she kept the good one. And I saw it, and I was like, how dare you? Instead of saying like, yeah, you take what you deserve. You take the better one if you can get it. Like I think that we have so internalized these messages that I've now translated them to the next generation. So I'm sorry to my kids. But I'm also taking them in as a rabbi and thinking about our Jewish translation of these ideas and what it means to be able to kind of take a step back and look at the assumptions and the restrictions and the guidelines of a sacred tradition that's thousands of years old, and be able to say, I can see where this could be really problematic.
Yeah.
And I can also see where it could be really beautiful and a force for good in the world. And I appreciate the invitation to just step back and consider, which you helped me do by writing this book. So I want to thank you for offering that.
Well, one thing that I think is interesting, and I definitely do not know all the mitzvahs, but when you think about the 10 Commandments, they're about action, and they're quite clear, right? What is right action? You don't kill, you don't steal, etc. Like there's a clear demarcation there that I think is a very safe container for a culture, right? And even this rule, so clear. It's just you don't do this thing, you don't take this action. The thing that's so insidious about these sins is where's the line and who decides, right? There's this essentially you have to give your power over to some external authority to adjudicate whether you are lazy or gluttonous or prideful. Who decides? There's like a stripping away of any idea of an internal authority or internal compass. And I think that's why they're so, particularly so insidious. And I think for women, it's this like, we're so used to restriction that you're just like, I guess I need to restrict a little bit more. And she's really restricted. So that means like, I need to, going back to gluttony, I write about going to boarding school when I was 15 and having my first contact with a lot of young girls with eating disorders. And it was just shocking to me to be like, oh, 2 bagels with cinnamon sugar is like not a normal breakfast. I thought it was. And to watch myself move away from the pasta and gravitate to the salad bar. This restriction is so, whereas I think it's so kind to say, here's the law, stay within these bounds, which are clear. And then you can decide whether to disobey it.
The rabbis also say that without the Yetzer Hara, without the desire without a kind of hunger, the world wouldn't exist, because it's that yearning that makes us, yearn to procreate, yearn to build, to work hard so that we can build homes. So like the world is sort of sustained in some way on our desire and our inclination. I'm gonna in a moment. Let me just see it. Do we have a couple questions here? Because I want to ask one last thing. That's actually okay. So we'll take one question, and then if one more pops up, we'll grab that. You said to me on the phone today that your Jewish identity shifted since October 7th, and I'm just curious if you would be willing to share a little bit about your own awareness of yourself as a Jew in the course of these really difficult months that that we're all living through.
Yeah. So my mom is she would call herself a recovering Catholic, and my dad is Jewish by way of South Africa. And I went to services similarly in a Methodist church in Missoula growing up. And we had a female rabbi who we flew in from San Francisco maybe like once a month. I don't know. I was young. And I did like the Purim play. I did everything, and I really loved it. And then I think I didn't have a bat mitzvah. There was nobody to, there was like a parent. And that seemed sort of like a cop-out to me, I guess, in my performative way. So I didn't have a bat mitzvah. And when I don't know if it was in boarding school or when I got to college, but at some point I was told I wasn't really Jewish. And I have been told the opposite many times by people like you, but it was very deep in me that I couldn't really claim to be Jewish. And I think there was a cop-out in that as well. And I have become a friend, that book, Here All Along, I'm sure many of you guys have read. Sarah, yeah. Beautiful book. Like, that really, hit me hard. And then October 7th, I came alive. It's interesting because I was talking to Matt Gutman, who some of you probably know. I was interviewed. He wrote this book called No Time to Panic, and he's the ABC chief news correspondent. He's been in Gaza and Israel since October 8th. And he said to me, I have an anxiety disorder, he has a panic disorder, and he said to me, well, when we think about sort of the intergenerational or the epigenetic signature of panic, my family left Germany in the 30s. Obviously I inherited their hypervigilance. It's how I'm alive. And I was like, oh, well, that makes sense for me too, because my father's mother left Warsaw. Her father they had a jewelry business and sold it abruptly and went to South Africa, where they were recruiting white people and Jews counted. And my grandfather was trying to be an actor in Germany. My real last name is Lowenstein, and he wasn't allowed to work. And he left, and his brother went to Israel, and he went to South Africa. And so I think too, I think about that hypervigilance that lives in me, that acute anxiety, and the masking and the hiding. And I'm sure I carry shame, speaking of shame, about surviving, and none of my I don't have direct ancestors who survived the Holocaust or died in the Holocaust. As far as I know, my dad knows nothing, and he's an only child. But I don't know, I think it made me feel like I couldn't relate, that I'd sort of skipped out. I keep skipping out somehow. And then 10/7, I don't know, came alive in a very raw way, like everyone else in this room, I'm sure. And incredibly defended and sad. And it's been really interesting to know sort of, I don't want to ever feel like I'm speaking for the Jewish I hate it when people speak for me, I don't know. It's been an interesting place to be in, and to not know where to begin.
It's a really hard time.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that.
No.
Okay. You know that Elise and I could talk for 3 more hours. We're not going to do that, though, because people need to go to sleep so they can come back tomorrow morning. But I think we're going to take just one question, and then we'll close tonight. And Nancy, will you just introduce yourself?
Okay, my name is Nancy Richmond. Happy to be here. I wanted to ask you a question about the book. I guess the question has to do with, insight is outstanding, but, how do we correct the issue of, now that you have so wonderfully exposed this issue, and certainly as a woman listening to you speak, I can think of horrible envy I had this week for someone who didn't even deserve it at all. And then I listened to you speak about how we kind of turn on each other with the projection, Not only do we point the finger at another woman, but we talk with somebody else about, ooh, you know what, she's got this, and, we sort of do something like that. So I started to think about maybe we need to, since a lot of people have these issues that you're talking about, the 7 deadly sins, maybe it would be good to start to talk about them. And I wondered if it had changed your relationships with other women now that you have this insight, and if you handle things differently.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I guess I didn't elaborate on an important part of envy, which is that, yes, it feels bad, but it's really just powerful information for you as you're experiencing it, because this woman who you want to deprecate is pushing on a dream that you have for yourself. She's doing something or she has something that you want. And unfortunately, as women, you kind of have to reverse engineer it to say, oh, I want that. I would never allow myself to acknowledge that that's what I want. But now that I see it, I recognize it. So, as you mentioned at the beginning, this is sort of, I just wanted to expose the system, because once you see these things, then you can start to interrupt them and think about them and stop it. And I also wanted, the book is not sort of like, there are certainly men in the world who are causing grievous harm. It's not, I don't sort of let men off the hook, but I feel like so many of my friends spend so much of our righteous anger being mad at quote unquote men or the patriarchy or whatever whoever's running that we sort of lose responsibility for ourselves and what we can do, which is attend to this in ourselves. And like, I'm not really worried about, like, women, unfortunately, guys, girls have been outperforming boys in school for a century. We live longer. And I think we're sort of like boxers who have been training at high altitude. And I think if we could get out of our own way and get behind each other, the world would change very fast. I think we have to stop waiting for men to change, whatever that means, and just change ourselves a little bit. I'm not suggesting that we can't be really hard on systems, but I like to be, I can't remember who said this, we should be hard on systems and soft on people. Cole Peters, maybe. I hate not being able to attribute things, but I think it's just recognizing it, stopping it, noticing it, and when we can do that on a cultural level, I think things start to shift.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. I am so grateful. I bless you with continued strength. Keep writing. Your writing is so good. Folks, the book is called On Our Best Behavior, The 7 Deadly Sins and the Price Women Pay to Be Good. Elise, thank you. Come back to IKAR. We love having
thank
you
you for
here.
all you
Bring
guys
your
are
family.
such a light in the world.
Thanks for staying late, folks. Have a good night. And if you don't mind on your way out bringing your plates to the table, that would be